Hi, Jess.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you?
Good. Are you okay over there?
I'm good now.
Gonna be okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna be okay. Got to figure out this setup, you know?
I pressed record for the first time ever.
How did it
Sarah's
feel?
not trusting me at all and is going to be so off this whole time.
How bad I want to walk over there and
I
check
know.
that screen to make sure it's on record is so high, but I'm stopping
I
myself.
kind of want you to walk over here and check it too, but I think
trust
we're good.
you. I trust you. As long as it's moving, we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Can I check it?
Yeah, Jay, check it. Check it, Jay.
Oh my God.
The amount of faith.
It's recording.
Okay, awesome. I feel better now. Thank you for that. This is your first time, Jess, you know?
Okay.
You got to double check it. You got to make
I
sure.
do a lot of good other things
you
around
do
here.
amazing things. There's no doubt about that.
We got a good episode. Cheryl, I promise, like, we're it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through it.
Okay,
but yeah, we've got
I have
Sheryl
all the faith in both
Fogarty
of you.
here today. We are very excited to chat with her about all things conscious parenting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mouthful, conscious parenting.
I know.
To say it.
It is.
But first, before we get started, we want to introduce Cheryl, and then we'll get started. We'll jump right in. So Sheryl Fogarty is a dedicated mother of 2 girls and the founder of Conscious Parenting with Sheryl Fogarty. With a passion for sharing the principles of conscious parenting, Cheryl is committed to nurturing mindful and compassionate relationships between parents and children.
She believes in the potential of future generations and aims to empower parents to create nurturing and supportive environments for their families. Through her coaching, Cheryl provides practical guidance and heartfelt support to help parents connect deeply with their children and foster their overall well-being. Welcome to the morning meeting,
Thank
Cheryl.
you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're
I can't believe it.
finally- Yeah,
We've been
we're so excited to have
investing.
you.
We've been manifesting this.
Yeah.
Conversation.
I feel like I have
Yeah.
myself
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Like, because I've been following you guys for forever, and I'm just super, excited about all the things that you bring to the table and all the topics and conversations. It's been amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ditto. And we had some conversations offline or
Yes.
off the record,
Yes.
the three of us, and we knew that we had to get you around the table officially
Thank you.
to chat with us. So why don't we start, why don't you just tell us more about your journey to starting Conscious Parenting with Sheryl Fogarty?
Okay.
I need to ask just from the start, what is conscious
Yeah.
parenting?
We need the
Sure.
we need
What
the
does it
Coles
mean?
notes.
Contextualize
I was just gonna
that
say
for
that.
us.
Yeah.
Because we all may have an idea of what we think that means, and we could be wrong, right?
Yeah,
so
no, exactly.
we may
There's
be
nothing
like,
wrong.
and we don't
I
know
was
what
wrong.
conscious
There's no
parenting
wrong.
is.
I was wrong.
Answer.
Cheryl and I had a lot of conversations, and I went to one of her peer
Peers.
groups,
Yeah.
and I was like, I had it all wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so you need to
Sometimes.
tell us, what is
Yeah.
conscious
Yeah.
parenting? Why is it important
Sure.
to you to be a conscious parent? And what led you down this road
Yeah.
to starting Conscious
I'll try to
Parenting with
give you
Sheryl
the
Fogarty?
Coles notes, like you said, Jess.
Just a few softballs to get us
Yeah.
started here.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with how I got into it. Before I had my girls, I knew that there was something missing. I read a book called No Bad Kids by Janet Lansbury, and I thought, okay, and they were calling it positive parenting at the time in that book. And there's so many different terminology that you can use: gentle parenting, positive parenting, whatever. So before I got into the conscious part of it, that's kind of what I was learning about and I was interested in. And then I decided to go back to school and do my undergrad and did my honors in psych when the girls were really young. Because I thought, I'm learning all this stuff about, child development and, the brain. And I'm just but how can I not do this with my own kids? I'm what are we missing here? What's this missing link?
Right.
And I kept thinking okay, there's a link between childhood and, adolescent mental health struggles and further adult mental health struggles. It doesn't just start when they're teenagers. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, I don't know where this came from. Why are all these kids struggling? And I'm I couldn't wrap my brain around, but I'm learning about it. And I'm but then I still couldn't do it.
Right.
So I'm I get, there's no judgment. I get why parents don't want to go this route, or don't really understand it or can't really grasp it, because we just didn't learn it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, right? Like, so until we start having these kinds of conversations, nobody's going to know about it, right? So anyway, so I fast track through the undergrad, and then I'm like, okay, I got that, but I'm like, what else am I going to do? How am I going to bring this forth? And then I ended up working for a whole different kind of company where I was working for my boss at the time. And it was a pharmaceutical research company. And I was like, okay, it was great. It was a great job. And, but it still wasn't what I was looking for. So I kept thinking, like, how am I going to get back to this? And one day I just was scrolling on Instagram as one does. And Dr. Chevallier's Conscious Parenting Coaching Institute popped up. And I was like, okay, like, what is this? And then I kind of looked into that and I researched her a bit, and I was like, oh, I remembered hearing her on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. And I was like, oh, this is the same girl. Never read the books, never, she's written tons of books, but, and then I was like, okay, I think this is what I was looking for. Like, I just didn't even know that it existed. Right. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take this. So I took that course, and it was a 5-month in-depth coaching course where she taught us really through experiential learning and through a lot of other ways how to be, a conscious parenting coach. But I went into it thinking, I'm going to get to teach all these parents like how to be the best parents.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, this is me. Like, I have to do the work. I have to learn all these things and unlearn a lot of things in order to become conscious myself and be aware of so much of my own learned biases and figure this out. And then it was through that process that I really, it opened my eyes. I was like, oh, like, this is what consciousness means. And it really, which is why that term really stuck with me versus like the positive, because positive can have such a negative connotation too, where we think, oh, like, we have to be positive all the time. Like, we just have to be happy all the time. And that's completely the opposite of what parenting is, as you both know. Yeah. Both have kids too. But so consciousness is just, it's a commitment to bringing things to our awareness. So we're understanding why we have the triggers in the first place. We're going back to those early, childhood experiences that like kind of led to those triggers, figuring that out, and then, really just constantly doing that. It's time consuming. It's, it takes a lot of intentionality of the parent to do this work. So it's not for the faint of heart. And I get that like, a lot of people just, don't have the time and don't have the capacity to do it. So there's no, like I said, there's no judgment, on anyone who doesn't want to take this route. But I couldn't not talk about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And I think that like because I know we talked about this before of like, all the different parenting styles, like attachment parenting and gentle parenting and positive parenting, like, it always bothered me how there was always like a label to it, right? Because I'm like, I just think the best way to parent is whatever way works for you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like to put a label on it. Some people like labels. It helps them, figure things out a little bit. But so when I heard about this conscious parenting, I was like, hey, is this going to be just another label, another trend or whatever? Or a way to make me feel guilty if I'm not being gentle or whatever. But then when we talked about it, to say like, it's really just being conscious of what you're doing and stopping and checking yourself to say, okay, wait, why did I do that? Why did I react that way? Where does that come from? It's actually like helpful, not even just as a parent.
No, exactly.
Like, I think that everyone should be doing this work, whether you have kids or not, to say like, there's reasons why we are the way we are and why we act certain ways. And it's so interesting when you peel those layers back.
Yeah. That critical reflection piece is huge.
And sometimes it brings up some like I mean, I resented my mother for years and years and years when I was younger, like in my 20s. But now as a parent, as I'm peeling all these things back, I'm like, God, I wish we just had like talked about this more. Or like, I wish she had recognized, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Really, it's like the reparenting of yourself, right? Like understanding what has led you to be this person, this full person that you are now, better or worse, like, and I think the awareness piece really helps contextualize it for me. So similar, Jess, I'm like, what is conscious parenting? What does that mean to be conscious? And when you said like really that awareness of yourself, like being aware of the triggers or the reactions or the behavior, understanding the root of those things, I think is so important. We know how important that is in our interpersonal relationships in general, especially with our kids, like to be able to be in tune with yourself and have the behavior and then understand why that was the reaction or that was the behavior that came from that critical reflection piece, which I love to chat about
and
that.
you talk about like in a lot of my previous work, it's a lot of like working with children and self-regulation. And I used to think when I was doing this, like, I think first we need to teach the parents how to self-regulate because here we are telling them like, like kids need to self-regulate. You need to be like whatever. But I'm like, how can you teach self-regulation if you don't even know what that feels like in your own body?
Right. And most of us don't, I would argue.
No,
most of us
definitely
grew
not.
up, and not to any fault of the parents. Like they didn't know. There wasn't an internet. There wasn't a myriad of parenting books out there to help them, understand this. So, and there just wasn't even as much research.
Right.
Like we just have a plethora of research now that we can like sift through, which also can be harmful because there's so much information out there now, right? So what do we follow? Where do we look? What's guiding us? So that can be like very dysregulating in and of itself.
Yeah.
Children need enough co-regulation. Self-regulation doesn't happen unless you have that piece.
Right.
And if you don't have that, then that's stunted. And then people grow up. We can make it through life. We can survive, but we're not going to thrive, in our day-to-day lives. And we just don't understand that, right?
Yeah.
Like we just didn't get there in society yet where we've really like opened up to that. And we're like, because we don't want to blame anybody. And I get that too, right? Like I don't, but it took a long time as you, like I had a ton of resentment. I didn't want to blame anybody. I didn't want to, but I was like, we have to start having these conversations or we're never going to get anywhere.
Right.
We're never going to mitigate it. We're never going to eradicate it.
Right.
There's always going to be mental health struggles out there. Like, there's obviously a biological piece to a lot of them too, but I think we really need to start talking about it or we're just never going to get anywhere.
Exactly. Opening up that dialogue is important. I like what you said about the intentionality piece of it and that it's a commitment. Like it's not easy just one day to decide you're going to do this. But that's where you come in, right? That's why it's important to have this coaching service to be able to help people understand that this is work, right? Like we'll help you through it. We'll help you through the work.
Do you think that, because I feel like I'm a very self-aware person. Like I feel like I know what I'm doing, even if it's wrong. I know that, like I'm aware of that. Like
Same.
Do you think it's like hard for some people to be self-aware? Like, do you think some people just don't have self-awareness?
1,000%, I see it.
Because I don't understand that. Because like I feel like I'm so self-aware that I can't. So like, if you're not aware of what you're doing, how can you even begin to do the work?
Yeah.
Right.
And,
like,
and not everybody can, and not everybody will. I think, it does take that first step of like taking the step to like contact, get the help, or read a book or figure it out. But some people might not, and we just have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Like there are going to be people out there. I used to think like, I can't talk about this if like everybody doesn't get it.
Right.
Everybody has to be on board or I'm never going to be able to do this because I was such a people pleaser. I was like, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. Like, and this type of work really pokes the bear.
Yeah.
Like this is not like for the faint
That's
of heart.
how you know you're doing something right. Right.
Exactly.
When there's contention.
Right. Yeah. And now I get that and I'm okay with it. But like, I was not okay with that before.
Right.
Like, I was like, everybody has to be on board. Everybody has to agree with me.
Right.
Right.
But now I get it. I'm just like, okay, I can see that because before it was like I felt like that was saying that I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
If they were, like
if they're right, you're
pushing
wrong.
back. And I was like, because I just didn't have that awareness that like, that's their projection. That's on them, not me. This is still okay to talk about. And we need to talk about this. Right?
Can you kind of give us an example of like what it looks like to be a conscious parent, just so that people that are listening can put themselves in this scenario to see as like, is this something that I could use, like that could be helpful?
Is it something I'm doing already and not calling it that? Right.
Yeah,
like
what
does it mean to be a conscious parent?
If you are asking that question, you're probably a conscious parent.
Interesting.
Like no bad parent, and I wouldn't even say there's a bad parent because I don't think anybody goes into this role thinking that I'm going to be. I can't wait to. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah. They'll bleep it out.
I don't think they're going to be like, I can't wait to be a parent and like mess up my kids. Like nobody's thinking that when they go into this role. When we get into a triggering situation, we don't know that we're running on fight or flight. Like our body is just going into dysregulation and we're just bringing at the forefront whatever is quickest that we can grasp to do to alleviate that.
Yeah.
And all we're trying to do is suppress the emotion within our own bodies.
Right.
We don't know that our brain doesn't know that child having a tantrum in front of us is not going to hurt us.
Yeah, it's not the grizzly bear.
We don't need to run away from that.
Right.
But our brain doesn't know that, right? So I do like to talk about the brain and the nervous system, like when, I'm in the initial stages of the coaching, dynamic, because it's such a big piece
Yeah.
for me too. Like we need to learn, and I'm sure most people have like, somewhat of an understanding of how the brain works. So when we're talking about dysregulation, we're really talking about, the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So sympathetic, we're in fight or flight. Parasympathetic, or rest and digest, and we oscillate between the two, and we want to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
So we want to have that good vagal tone, but most of us didn't get that. Most of us were probably in one or the other for chronic periods, and it stays stuck like that.
Right.
So we don't know. So another piece is that you feel really tired when you start to heal, and I wish I had known that, right? Like, so parents, it's scary. You think like, oh my God, I'm sick. Like there's something wrong with me or whatever. But it's like, no, your body just feels safe, and you feel safe to like rest. Like you're not like, vibrating at a certain level for so long, right? So I always say that like right off the bat, like don't feel scared, because that is going to happen. And I should also preface that like I am not a therapist yet.
Right.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You're working on that, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But so I can't, treat or diagnose mental illness. So I always, start with that as well. But maybe hopefully have some, some information that I can help to help them have that, compassionate sort of connection, really close, deep connection with their children. I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But I really do think that people don't understand too what, unconditionality means, right? Like, so we think I love my kids unconditionally, but some of the traditional parenting practices are really conditional.
Right.
It's like, oh, if you don't do this, you don't get a cookie. If you don't do this, even timeouts. And I know a lot of people like get, upset about that, but it's like, but that's a disconnection for the child. So it does what it's supposed to do. It's going to stop that behavior, but it's not going to give them what they need, which is that emotional connection to learn what they should do.
Right. And it's like not long lasting or long term.
No,
so it's only in that moment. You don't learn anything. Like sure, the behavior stops, but then they'll just do it again.
Yeah.
As opposed to like teaching the skill of self-regulation to help them cope with that emotion.
Right.
And then,
we learn through experience as kids. Like we learn watching the adults around us and how they are in the world, right?
Yeah.
So more so than anything we say is our body language, our, our
nonverbals. You're modeling the behavior.
Communication expert.
No, you are though. That's how we learn to communicate, right? They were modeling of our behavior. Yeah. That's so true. I think what you said there about rest is really interesting. Like that really stuck out to me because we feel safe to rest. And like we don't often feel that way. I think that is so true. And I also think like it makes sense that this experience could be tiring or exhausting for someone because it's emotional labor, right? Like it's a lot of emotional labor that's happening, that work that you're doing.
We don't realize how often when our brain is in a spiral, a loop, we're thinking like, oh, I should do this, I should do that, especially as parents or as women. We're constantly thinking, oh, I shouldn't have yelled, I shouldn't have did this.
Yes.
That's draining your energy.
Yeah.
And when we're constantly thinking like that and it's on a loop, we're so tired at the end of the day. We're like, oh my God, I didn't even do anything. Why am I so tired? You don't have like energy to do all the other things.
Right.
Like I can't even begin to tell you now after going through that, like how much more energy I have now than I've ever had in my entire life.
Right.
Which is so crazy to me.
Yeah.
I always thought I had so much energy and now I'm like, oh.
And I think too that like when I think about kids and when I've just like done work with families and stuff, I always say that like you want to have the same respect for your kids as you do for adults. And I think that there's not enough we don't respect our kids enough. Yeah. That like they're humans too.
Absolutely.
And like if we mess up, we can just go and apologize just like we would with an adult.
Yeah.
If we screw up, hey, like I'm really sorry about that. Like that's not typical behavior of me. Like how can I make this better?
Yeah.
I do that with Logan, like, because I want him to know that it's okay for you to mess up.
Exactly.
Like I mess up too.
Yeah.
Like
That
this
you're
is a normal
responsible.
thing. And you need to take accountability for your actions.
Yeah,
like,
you're
mommy
responsible.
really overreacted there. And I just, here's why I might have done that. And I just want to let you know that I'm sorry and I'm going to work on that.
Right. And that modeling is so much more important than trying to pretend like you're perfect all the time. Because there is no such thing
I
as
always say this too,
perfection.
like we're not robots. Our kids aren't robots. We're not robots. We have feelings. We have emotions. They're going to come out.
Absolutely.
We just need a plan and a strategy with how to work with those.
Exactly.
Because then
there
what
is no such thing as perfection.
Right. Yeah, because what happens when you're not there, right?
Yeah.
If you're not there to put them in the timeout after the tantrum, like they need to be able to get themselves from here to here when they're experiencing big emotions, right? They have to be able to regulate and understand and make sense and then understand the behavior in whatever context they're in. And you won't always be there to help them do that.
Exactly.
Right?
And the behavior is not okay, but sometimes, but the feelings are okay.
Right.
Right.
So we
Exactly.
have to like acknowledge like, oh, like you're
Exactly.
feeling,
Of course.
yeah, you really want that cookie. I know you want that cookie before dinner, but no, you can't have it.
Right.
You know,
So-
you still can't have it, but I know it sucks that you can't have it.
Yeah. And I think like we need to recognize that. And I say this to my clients all the time, that we can say no to our kids and for them to be okay with that.
Yep.
And discipline doesn't have to be this like stand over you, like with your finger pointing thing of like, like we can have those conversations without anger coming from them or you know, and I think that there's a missing piece there, that parents are just kind of hands up and their toddlers are ruling the roost and they have no control because they're afraid to say no to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're right. Like parents sometimes are afraid to say no to their kids because they think that's going to ruin the connection. But if you're too permissive, you know, we're on one end of the spectrum, then the kids don't need that either. They actually do need us to be those gentle leaders.
They feel safer that way.
Yeah. Like if they're like, we think that they want that control, but they really don't because it doesn't help them learn anything. You know, they need us to be those gentle leaders and say no, but we can do it without being scary and fearful, because when we're scary and fearful and we're, you know, loud and booming and whatever, you know, our brains are going to shift that way. So our amygdala is going to grow larger. Our brain is going to constantly look to scan the environment, because all our brain is really doing is keeping us safe.
Right.
Like we're just another species on Earth. Our brains and our nervous system is here to keep us safe, not happy, not anything else. Doesn't even know what emotions are. Like we put those labels on things, and it's just scanning the environment constantly for cues of safety. So if what we got is, oh, this is how I became safe, because when I, you know, stopped that behavior because the scary man was yelling at me, or the scary woman or whatever was yelling at me. Okay, that's what kept me safe. So now we're going to constantly scan the environment for cues of safety. And if whatever is familiar to our nervous system, that's what we're going to look for. So that saying, you know, our nervous system is going to look for a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven at any time. It's the reason that we continue on doing patterns, the same repeated patterns, whether it's unconscious, right? Because we're just not aware of it, that we're doing it.
And you also start to manage emotions from that, right? Like if you think your behavior leads to the parents' explosive yelling or the whatever, like you're doing things to be like you're on edge, waiting for those various reactions to whatever it is you're doing.
This is where that chronic state of like we're constantly in that chronic, or they call it like sometimes CPTSD, where we're constant. I shouldn't be putting labels on things because I'm not able to diagnose anything, but you know, I think all the information is out there anyway. But we're in that state for a heightened amount of time. Right. So, and it leads to a whole host of issues, right? Like I remember learning about the HPA axis. I'm like, this is a mind-body connection. Why is nobody talking about this in like everyday life? Like this is literally the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is like goes from the mind to the body. And this is what releases cortisol. And if there's too much cortisol running through our body, we have inflammation, and we have inflammation, we have disease. Like this, like, how are we not discussing this, right?
System thinking, like that whole systems thinking. Like,
and we're so disconnected from our bodies that like we don't even know when a feeling arises. So like some people say like just change your thoughts, change your life, like whatever. Sure, but like it's a little bit more than that. I think it's a little bit more nuanced. Like if we're not connected to our own bodies, we don't know. We're just not aware that what's happening in our body feels scary to us. That feeling of like, I always think of something like rising into my body and like making me angry, like my shoulders tense, like, you know, my breathing shortens and my whatever. So what I always feel like happening is we're trying to suppress it by like stopping that behavior. We just need that behavior to stop so that we feel better.
Yes.
So if that's the case and we have like a knee-jerk reaction, then you know you're doing it unconsciously. Right. You know, so if you're being conscious about it, you're like, you can take that step back. So we're just trying to build that window of tolerance where like we have a little bit more space there to think about, okay, am I just reacting to this because... And I do get, you know, specific questions about certain scenarios, like where people want to hear, and I get it. And Dr. Becky and, you know, Good Inside and Dr. Shefali are really good at like coming up with all those scenarios. But I think, you know, things are going to change so quickly. Like you have a kid, 1 minute they're a toddler, next minute they're a teenager, next minute they're going off on their own and into nursing school, and you're not sure if they're going to, you know, be able to live on their own, right? Yeah. But it happens so fast. Yeah. And if we're not just attuned in the moment, then we're losing all of everything else is just noise, right? Like we need to be in the moment and figure out, okay, like, am I reacting to something that happened in my past and I'm projecting that onto them? Or is this something that I need to actually
And I
handle in
think
the
once
moment.
you start doing that, you build your habit of doing it, right?
Absolutely.
Because like you
Yeah.
can't just change it overnight. Once you
No.
recognize the reaction, you might react that way again, but
Yeah.
then you're catching yourself sooner to say,
Yeah.
okay, I reacted like that because
Yeah.
ABC, right? Like that habit is forming from there.
Absolutely.
And I think too, that emotional expression piece that you're talking about, I think I was reminded of it when you said that about anger. Like we do have a very limited scope of human emotion sometimes, right? We say like happiness, anger, sadness, fear. Like there's like 5 that we kind of universally know around.
Yeah.
But our culture like really influences the different emotions too. Our language, like there's different cultures around the world have different words or language to explain various feelings. There's one that's like feeling cozy in your home with friends. Like there's a word for that. And because there's a word for it, they feel it more often.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're talking about it and you can feel it and you're more conscious of it in your
Yes.
body. So even that scope of emotional expression, like I'm angry. Okay. Am I angry or am I scared? Am I anxious? Am I nervous? Am I, you can feel like more than one thing at a time. Can you tell us, Sheryl, you said it earlier, but what we were talking about discipline and how important discipline is. Can you define like what does discipline mean?
Right.
Be a disciple.
I'm sure people have heard it before, but like a disciple, like in the true sense of the term, means student.
Right.
A disciple is a student. So we need to be a teacher,
Right.
versus it doesn't mean punishment.
Yeah. So
And I think
discipline
it
is
just
to
got
teach, not to punish.
it got messed up along the way where like a lot of people took it and used it whatever way they wanted to, for whatever means they needed.
Right.
And it just got misconstrued over the years. Right.
Yeah. Love that.
But also like even in our teachings, like they learn so much from the way that we are. So that's why we always bring it back to us in conscious parenting. Like, how are we in this moment? Like we want to build that connection with our kids. And I think, not also the connection is not going to get lost over like one moment of flipping our lid or whatever, in the brain hand model. When we flip our lid, we're just dysregulated, just like they are. Like, right. So like you said, Jess, about like repair, like Dr. Becky talks about it a lot in her books and in her podcast. Getting really good at repair is probably the first step. So recognizing it, like you said, Jess, like it does help to build those neuronal connections. Like if we didn't have it in the first place, and I think we talked about it when we talked before about, I always say it's like the train running down the tracks, right? And then there's a fork up ahead and to the right, it's like, oh, that track, I can see that for miles. And that's so easy. Like that's the path we only knew, right? So of course, most people are going to take that. And to the left, it's like, oh, it's only like partially built. I might have to like get out and lay some tracks down and then like get back in and drive a little bit more. And then but then along the way, oh, more people come and help us. And then the track is getting built quicker and then we can go a little bit farther, right? So yes, it's harder. It takes more time. It's like our brain wasn't built in a day either, right? I think, I don't even know if we're one of the only species, but like where our nervous system is continually growing outside of the womb, right? So I mean, it's just,
there's a reason
people
for that.
really resist like hard work. And I've seen that like with clients of like, that like, it's really hard work to like, like if you talk about like, I don't know if there's like behavior going on and you're trying to like get the desired behavior, like it's not going to happen overnight. Like you have to make changes and you have to start, it's hard to put boundaries in place and it's hard to set limits. And that's why parenting is so difficult.
I think
parenting is very, if you're not, this way I say, if you're not miserable, you're not doing it right. Because it's so hard in every way. Like, like emotionally, physically, mentally, like it drains you. And of course it's the best thing ever. And I always say like, I love being a mom, but being a parent is so difficult.
I also think, I don't know if it's necessarily like people don't want to work hard, but I think sometimes people are just tired or exhausted and don't know where to start and feel defeated, right? Like, I don't want to put the work in. It's not like, oh, I'm lazy, I don't want to put the work in. I think it's like I'm overwhelmed and my energy, my gas tank is empty. So like that seems like that's going to take a lot of energy. Where I could just keep doing what I'm doing.
Or it's not the priority right now.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right?
Yeah. I think hearing you speak, Sheryl, too, a lot about this, I'm thinking like, how often do we live in the present? Like we know that from, various other conversations where we as humans often spend our time in the past or the present or in the future, right? Like if I'm anxious about something, it's probably about something that happened before that I'm overthinking or something that's about to happen that I'm nervous about or whatever. I'm rarely in the present. And when I am, that anxiety sometimes goes away, right? Like that feeling of being able to ground yourself and be present in the moment. So like you're saying, you know, that toddler, if they're a tantrum, that doesn't mean they're going to tantrum for the next 18 years. Like, but sometimes we feel that way.
Yes.
Like if this is the behavior that happens.
Like, and that you're right, because a lot of it is like some education too, right? Like where like we just don't realize that like, toddlers are going to tantrum. Like that's developmentally age appropriate behavior for a toddler.
Babies are
like
going to cry. Like
but
that's
we're so
appropriate.
fearful of the expectations of society that we get, oh my God, I'm a terrible parent if my kid's having a toddler, right? Like, so we're constantly thinking, you know, yes, the future too, but also like, what's everybody else thinking of me as a parent, right? Yeah. And like, that's kind of what learning this whole conscious parenting has done for me too. It just alleviates all of the noise, right? Like, so you get to like tune into you get to tune into your child. Yeah. The connection, I always tell the story, and I think I don't know if I told you guys, I think you heard it in the Parent Peers, Jess, where like, I was talking to my daughter, and it was a few years ago, and I think she was around like 6 or 7 at the time. And I was just like, like talking over her. And I don't even remember what the conversation was about. And I was doing her hair, and I looked in the mirror, and she was going, she didn't have the words, but then I was like, it's sort of like took me out of that. Yes. And I remember being like, oh, are you like, am I talking to, and then I was like, oh, I am talking too much. Like you're trying to tell me, but you don't have the language to tell me that like, sometimes we just need to like, because we would feel as parents, like that's disrespect. Right. But like, she just needed to tell me that like, I can't even take in what you're saying because you're going a mile a minute and my brain isn't even quick enough to keep up with what you're saying. Right. So a lot of times we're just like, it's falling on deaf ears. We think, oh, I told them that 50 times, but they can't even hear. I don't know if you guys read the study. It was just a recent study too about like this off topic, but kind of not, about teenagers. And I think it was done at Harvard. I might be forgetting it, but anyway, they found that teenagers' brains, they could actually pinpoint on an fMRI which age a specific child was due to their scans, because when they were talking to their parents, younger kids tune into their parents more, but older kids tune the parents out. So like when we say like, oh, teenagers don't listen to us, it's like, yeah, they're supposed to. And you know why? Because evolutionarily, we need to leave the nest at some point. So that's right. I know. I was like, oh my God, this is fascinating. Like, because we just don't know. There's so much out there, right? Yeah. But it's all of that sort of societal or, cultural beliefs around kids, and kids should be seen and not heard. And all of these things that we need to unlearn, right? Like about kids, it's like a lot of this stuff is just age appropriate behavior, and we just think it's not. Right.
So or we take things personal.
Well,
I think that's another thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That it's not us. Yeah. Like it's what they're dealing with, but it has nothing to do with us, but they're projecting it onto us because we're their safe space.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And that's a good thing. We want them to do that, but then it's understanding that that's where that's coming from, and it's not like an attack.
Exactly. I think there's a misconception too about happiness. Like, and I wonder if some of this is tied to it. Like we think we're supposed to be happy all the time, which that's just not true, right? Like you're hungry, you eat, you're not hungry anymore. Like, contentment is a great thing to find more often than not, but happiness, like that's an emotion that you'll feel and you won't feel. And it's fleeting. It comes and it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't need to like make the decisions as a parent to constantly have your kids be happy. That's just not.
It's not our responsibility. I feel like that's not our responsibility either. Like they need to feel other things.
Well, it's not our responsibility, and it's not realistic. Right. They will feel sadness. They will feel fear. They will feel anger, and they should be able to feel it without being scared of it. Yeah. And know how to communicate through it, which some adult we don't know how to do all the time.
Exactly. And I feel
sorry, no, I'm just gonna say we're the first generation really that's like learning this, having to unlearn it, and also teach our kids at the same time. So it's like, whoa, this is a lot. This is a lot to take in, a lot to process. So it's like it can be really overwhelming, which is why like I thought like, okay, like maybe a coaching business would help like with people, right?
Yeah. I just got the visual of the
in Inside Out.
Well, that
movie.
It's so good. Me too. But the visual of like, we're talking about I always say the pendulum swinging too. And we talk about it in like media, for example, like it, it swung over and now the teachers the students knew it better than teachers. So it's hard to teach the ethics behind it, et cetera. We are the generation that is working on bringing the pendulum just back to the center.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Like I could just see us all glomming onto this pendulum and like
hanging on for dear life.
Back to the middle. Like, come on,
I think
team,
too that like human, like we are resilient beings. Yeah. And I think that there's like parents are spending too much time, especially this generation, doing for their children and trying to protect every little emotion, that kids are starting school, getting older, and they don't have coping skills.
Yeah.
They don't have coping strategies, and they can't handle anything.
Yeah. And you know why?
They need space to do that.
Because the parent is unconscious, and we didn't like what we felt in those moments, and we didn't have the words to express it a lot of times. So we don't want them to feel that. We don't want them to suffer. But like, pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. Like, we don't have to suffer through anything that we go through, right? Like, no matter what it is. But pain is always going to be there. It's a part of life. And like you said, Jess, like happiness, and I know this sounds really morbid, but I'm like, I always talk about like, this is proverbial mountaintop of happiness. Like, we're all trying to get there.
Right.
Like, it's so difficult, but like, that's death.
Yes,
Like,
that's right.
We're all trying to get to the mountaintop, and then like we die.
Yeah.
But I always thinking about, Logan, like,
there.
I'm like, oh, for the longest time, I was just like, how do I put this kid in a bubble and prevent him from bullying? Because that's like, I was working in the school system and I was seeing a lot of it, and I was like, I can't have this happen. But then I remembered that I also was bullied. Like, we all go through that, and that's a normal experience. And if I protect him from that, I'm not actually helping him. What I need to do instead is give him strategies to deal with that and cope with that. But it's like, it's a huge mindset shift, right? Because it's like you said, like, we don't want them to feel any pain.
You're right. Yeah. And you're right. It is a mindset. Like, conscious parenting is a mindset shift.
Yeah.
It's a shift in how we look at children, how we view them, how we, that look at the dynamic, the parent-child dynamic. It's not a hierarchy. Like, it's a connection. It's a relationship, right? And that's reciprocal, right? So we're getting from them just as much as we're giving to them. But yeah, there's no stopping a lot of these situations from happening. They're going to go out into the world. Like, things are going to happen to them. But the best thing we can do is give them the tools, like you said, and give them that deep, innate sense of self.
Right.
And that's what, like, I would believe that all parents want for their children is to truly know who it is they are at their authentic core.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember going through the course and being like, oh my God, I don't even know who I am. Like, what do I like? Because I was so used to doing for other people, right? Yeah. And it was like, it was so eye-opening to see that. And it was like, and not really even to any fault of my parents, like, just nobody knew how to do that, right? Because we're, like I said, it's conditional. A lot of the traditional parenting strategies. It was like, stop the behavior to like alleviate their own suffering, and it just keeps getting passed down and passed down until someone stands up and says no more. Like, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna, what can we do to like start to work on creating a better world, right?
What a good question for all of us to think about. Like, what do I like? Why do I do that? Do I have that type of supper on that day because that's what we always did when I was little? Like, do I even like that? You know what I mean? Like, what do I like? What are some myths, Sheryl, that are important to bust? Like, common myths about conscious parenting that you hear out there that you'd really like for us to debunk?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest one is probably that it's permissive. Like that, like we just lackadaisy. We're just like, we let them do whatever they want. They're going to grow up to be entitled snowflakes or whatever, whatever the terminology is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest misconception that you could possibly take away from it, because we need those boundaries, like Dr. Daniel Amen talks about. Like, we need to be firm and kind. We can set those boundaries, and that's what they really need. We don't just let them have ice cream every day for lunch if that's what they want. It's not, But I think people just didn't know, right? Like, that's just not where it is.
I'm careful not to like workplaces because employees don't need that, but I think that's important for leaders to listen to too, right? Like, firm and kind, like similar to conscious parenting. Like, conscious leadership looks like that.
It stems into
right?
that, right? Like, I remember too, just like, and I think you guys were there. It was one of the, and I think it was called Conscious Conversations, actually. Now that I think of it, it was one of the, I don't know, set up by not downtown development, but the Chamber, yeah. Okay. And it was a talk, and she was talking about biases and biases in the workplace. I don't know if you guys remember that, but I was like, where is childism on this list of like biases, right? And we don't even know, I don't think most people would know what that is. And it's just really that, like, because we're older and bigger, we have more authority. Yeah. But like, kids, like you said before, deserve the same respect as adults. They're fully functioning human beings. Yeah. It's like, yes, we need to take care of them, physically for a long time and emotionally, but we need to give them that same respect, right? And that's just where that kind of comes in. But they were saying like, oh my God, like, how do we get rid of all these biases in our workplace? And I'm like, well, we start there, because we need to start young. Like we need to start like with this parent-child dynamic, because people don't just walk into the workplace and think like, oh, I'm going to like, take over. I'm going to control everybody and I'm going to do what I want and whatever. It's like all of those, whether it be racism or, whatever, genderism, whatever, it starts young. Like we learn all of this stuff through our relationship, through our, connections with our caregivers, and it just keeps going from there. Right?
Yeah.
So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, like, where do I even begin? Like, where does someone start? They want to go on their conscious parenting journey. What do they do?
I think asking that question would be like the number one. Like, where do I start? And if you're thinking about it, then you're probably already on the journey. You're probably, and I mean, of course, like reading the book, The Conscious Parent is good too. But I think some people do even take away from that it's, because it's sort of the why, like it's sort of like deeply spiritual and, not religious whatsoever. But like, she does talk a lot about like humans and how like we have a finite time on earth. Like, why are we wasting it on so much like unnecessary like stuff, right? And then I think, and then reaching out, talking to your friends about it. Like, I think having conversations with people and, but yeah, there's tons of, I can give you lists and lists upon lists of books that like I've read over the last few years that would like help with that. And Dr. Daniel Siegel's another great one too, has a bunch of books that really help, and Dr. Shfali, and Dr. Becky. There's so much out there. And then of course, I mean, if anybody wants to, they can reach out to me as well.
Yeah.
But
where do they find you, Sheryl?
Yeah. Well, I have a website, SherylFogarty.com. And then I also have my Instagram page, which is the conscious_ish mom, which is a big mouthful, I know. And I didn't really think of it at the time, because I'm like, I'm just conscious-ish, because like nobody's conscious all the time. And even Dr. Shfali would be like, don't pedestalize me. Like I make mistakes too. Like I'm not perfect. There is no such thing as perfection. We're all striving to be like perfect people. And it's like, that's never going to happen. Like it's possible, right?
And if someone wants to work with you,
like
so they can one-on-one kind of thing.
I do have like a 30-minute discovery call, so we can like sit down and discuss like if this is the right path for them, like, and how that would look. And we can always adjust. Like I do have packages on there, like, there's 4 and 6 and 8, I think, sessions like within the packages, which you get a little bit of a break on money. But right now, it's, and then a 50-minute session as well. Okay. And I do have something in there too. And I talk a lot about it with my trainer, because we like during COVID, I used to do training through online or whatever. And we just kind of kept it going. And I was like, this is like the best thing for me. She's like, you wouldn't, and I was going through the course at the same time. So it was like, I got to talk a lot about it to her. And she was saying, you wouldn't even believe the things that people bring up during training sessions with her, like physical training. And I was like, well, that makes so much sense, because our body is such a big piece of it too. Like, we had to learn to meditate. We had to learn to move. We had to learn to, less judgment. Like there were so many things in the conscious parenting coaching course, but movement is a big one. And I was like, what if I did like a walk and talk, right? Like, so we're walking, and so you're moving your body and actually like getting to like discuss all these things. It is an option for anyone who's, who wants that too.
And is it one-on-one? Is there group sessions?
There is group sessions.
Parents do it together? Is it like what does it look like?
We have the parent peers, which is through Mommy Connections, Kate Breton, and Sarah is wonderful too. And we do that. We were doing that once a month. So that's free through, and you can sign up through Mommy Connections. But you can get a little bit of a break as well if you do like 5 and under parents want to get together and like have a group session. Like that's an option too on there. And it's great because it's good to like build community too, right? Like you need to have your peers, like find your tribe, like build those connections with the people who align with your beliefs, right? Like if you're constantly around people who don't have the same belief systems, like it's going to be way harder. It's going to be way harder for you. Like I would hear people say things all the time about kids, and I'd have to like bite my tongue and I'm like, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Like teenagers. And like, I'm like, right. And it just, I wasn't being my authentic self because like, that's not what I believed. Like, but, and I get it. I understand now because before I didn't have a ton of compassion. Like I was like, why isn't everybody getting this? You know,
Yeah.
but I was like, oh, right. Like I did this in school, or I did, you know, like I learned all this. Like it took me years of education and whatever. So now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Like I get why people can't get there sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I think the community piece is important because sometimes hearing other people's experiences take the pressure off you to say like, oh, you feel that way too, or you
Yes.
find this hard too. It's not
100%.
just me. So
Yeah.
like we can kind of let our guard down a little bit to be like, okay, I'm not alone, or this doesn't make me the only one out there who's doing this or thinking this way or whatever.
Absolutely.
Right?
Which is why I love you ladies so much.
Ditto.
For doing
Feelings
that, right?
mutual.
Like, just, I was like, this is what we need. And like in Cape Breton. And, you know, it's such a small community here. I remember, again, like in the course, and I was like, whoa, like these people are all over the world, like in Berlin and Singapore and Hawaii and all over the States, everywhere. And I was like, how can they have such similar situations and similar stories? They don't speak the same language. Like, then I realized, like, this is a global epidemic. Like, this isn't just in Cape Breton, like, you know, but we're sometimes like, we're so like, we're on our little island and we're like, oh, we're just doing our thing. But yeah, it's global.
It's the human experience,
It is,
right?
yeah,
Like what
absolutely.
connects us as human beings. Like, you know, that human experience is definitely a global one. I think we all have our unique, you know, attributes or identities based on like some sociocultural stuff. But really at the end of the day, like we're all these human beings just trying
to get through.
I feel like
Dr. Jody
and
Carrington.
connect and community.
I don't know if you guys know her, Dr. Jody Carrington. She's a psychologist out west, but she always says we're just trying to walk each other home.
Yeah.
We're just walking each other home.
Yeah. And I feel like we only scratched the surface. Like I feel like we didn't even go deep into any one thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I have some questions for like about yelling and conscious parenting and what people do if they're yellers, or like siblings. Like sometimes your kids need to be parented in a little bit of different ways. Like
that's a big one, actually. Sibling rivalry, screen time is another one.
How do we handle sibling
screen
rivalry?
time?
Screen time
That's a good one.
Is a big hot topic.
Ego involvement.
We didn't even touch the
How
ego.
do we unmask our ego?
There's so much.
Yeah,
so Jess, because there's so much to talk about with Sheryl, do you want to tell our listeners what our plan is here?
I get to say it?
You get to say it.
Oh my God, no. There's too much pressure. I'm like,
Press the record button, Jess. Press the record button. Well, we're going to we're going to go. We're going to have Sheryl back around the table because we knew that once we got started in this conversation that we would just have way too much to talk about to fit into our 1 episode time limit. And we know that this is layered because I'll be honest, it was hard for me to understand too sometimes. Like, what is conscious parenting? Do I agree with it? Is it my jam? Like, you know, and the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, oh, these have so many principles of communication that I'm like, yeah, I totally understand why we have to do that, right? But you're right in the sense that you don't have that language, or we don't apply it, or we haven't been taught how to do it, right?
Yeah.
So this is why it's so important. So we knew that we'd want to talk more about it, and we thought we'd have to have more than one session to do that in. So we're going to start a new series.
drum roll, please.
There's a drum roll button on there, but we won't mess with that right now. We're going to have a new series. Cheryl's going to join us around the table again. You'll have a chance to ask Sheryl some questions. I have some more questions I'd love to ask Sheryl about.
I did get some. I asked a question in my stories yesterday, and we didn't even get to
I
cover
know.
any of those either. But so hopefully we'll get to
So
those.
we'll go over those, and we're going to have a new session with Sheryl. And Jess, do you want to tell us what we're going to call this new segment?
Conscious Chronicles.
That's right.
The Conscious Chronicles.
The Conscious Chronicles with Sheryl.
With Sheryl.
So we'll sit down and we'll just talk about it, because I do feel Chronicles is a good word, because I feel like there'll be some
There's a lot.
some discussions. There'll be some up
But it
and
was
downs.
good to kind of just
Yeah,
have this
for
like
sure.
overall chat, kind of get comfy with what this is, and then take a deeper dive over the next few episodes, and you know,
Thank you.
figure this out on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So excited. Thank you, ladies.
We're so
'Cause
excited.
People have said it all the time. Like, you need to start. I'm like, I can't do a podcast. Like, who's going to want to listen to me talk to myself? Like, I was like, but I love talking to you, ladies.
I would too.
No,
This will be the start.
You guys are amazing.
You'll
I'm
get-
We'll
very
get you started,
appreciative.
and then you'll be good to go.
No.
We'll get you behind this mic once or twice, and then you'll be like, you know what?
I'm going to start my own
No, definitely not. No, but I love talking to you ladies about it.
And Jess and I will try to be honest. Like we won't agree with you for the sake of agreeing.
Yeah,
For
absolutely,
listeners
which
out
is
there
good.
who are
I like that.
no. If you have questions or you have some,
that's the thing. I'm not saying everybody has to agree. You know what I mean? Like you take it for what it is, and if you align, then you do it. And if not, that's okay too.
Yeah. And that's what, just for the listeners, like if you have feedback or you have questions or you have some criticisms you want us to share, like Jess and I will be your voice on that. We will share that with you. I mean, I'll be honest right now. I'm picking up what Cheryl's putting down for sure. Like this makes so much sense to me. But then I also understand it's hard. Like sometimes I do yell and then I have to apologize for yelling or understand why I yell. Yeah, I definitely bribe. I don't know where that comes into conscious parenting. So we'll talk more about that. Yeah. But yeah, we're not saying we're the perfect parent.
But you're not perfect, so you're going to do this.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's the key.
So that, by us chatting more about it and learning more from you and sharing this and just kind of opening up this discussion, we hope that we can kind of have a bigger dialogue about it. So if you have any questions out there for Sheryl that you want us to ask on our next segment of the Conscious Chronicles, we'll put a question box up. You can get those in. You can contact us anytime, and we'll make sure to put that down in our episode notes for our next conversation. We're striving for excellence around here, people, not perfection. We're striving for excellence around here. So we're doing our best. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. It was amazing.
Jess, you did a great job pressing the record button over there. You handled it like a champ. Very proud of you.
Where's my award?
That's right. Well, you got one earlier.
Where's my cookie?
You can find Sheryl on Instagram at the conscious_ish mom. And you can find her at SherylFogarty.com. We'll put all of that information in our episode notes so it's easy for you to find. Connect with us on Instagram if you have more questions or you want us to connect you with Sheryl. We'll be happy to. And, we're all doing our best.
We're all doing our best.
Yep.
We're doing the best with what we got.
That's right.
Exactly.
And that's what I always say.
And when you know better, you do better.
That's right.
So I just think sometimes
all words I've used.
if we can be, lifelong learning, parenting's no exception to that.
Exactly.
So we can just do our best. Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.